Hello again, everyone. To those just joining us or tuning in online, I'm Zia Weiser. I'm Politico Senior Climate Reporter, and I'll be interviewing the EU's Climate Commissioner, Wopke Hoekstra. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us here.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
And yeah, it's almost the last session of the day, so there's really no way around it. We have to talk about the emissions trading system, I'm afraid. It's sort of what you are probably working on most right now. Is that a good guess? But yeah, it's this cornerstone of EU climate policy is going to be revised very soon, month and a half, I believe. So is there anything that you can voluntarily divulge before I start probing you with questions?
Well, if I were to say no, it will be a relatively short on-stage interview, right? But of course, I mean, there are a couple of things I think we can say already at this phase, even though we're still very much in the engine room and creating what it is that we need going forward. I think the first thing we have to be very open and upfront about is that overall, this system has done phenomenally well. It has delivered like no other policy instrument on basically driving down emissions, in absolutely a spectacular fashion. And that is also the reason why so many others, from places as diverse as Quebec, California, Chile, Brazil, Mexico, China, have all either embarked or are embarking on a carbon pricing system with, of course, similarities, but also with differences compared to ours. So I think that is one. Secondly, we do have an opportunity and also an obligation to make it fit for the future and the next wave of climate action, but just as well competitiveness. And I think that is going to be the name of the game going forward.
Earlier today here we had Poland's Deputy Climate Minister, Chris Polesta, and he was making the case for a more and a longer time frame for free allowances, for example. And one of the details you've been, like a bit of a sneak peek you gave is that you might want to make free allowances contingent upon investment in Europe, right? If I understood you correctly.
Well, I mean, I read a piece, I think it was in Politico, on the interview that or the on-stage get-together that you had. And let me just spark his specific interview because I only saw a headline. But what is, of course, part of the problem or part of the challenge that we need to overcome is in how to arrange this in a way that is fair and fit for the future for our companies. One, we have to acknowledge there is a large group of companies that have doubled down on the transition, that have made very significant investments, and these investments simply need to be rewarded. Full stop. That is one. And those are the people typically, on the frontier of the action. And again, maybe not betting the farm, but betting and putting on the table very serious sums of money. Secondly, there is indeed a large group of companies where you could debate whether they have actually done enough, whether we should have been more reciprocal in not just providing them with free allowances, but also a quid pro quo and making sure that they would invest in Europe. But this group, of course, we ideally also want to bring into the future. And therefore a recipe that rewards the investments, that maybe allows for a bit of flexibility, but then with a much stronger quid pro quo, with the conditionality that stuff is happening here, that people are decarbonizing, that they are investing in a future in Europe, in itself, as a recipe, sounds like a smart and appealing thing to me.
What would that recipe look like? Like, is it, you invest €1,000 in Europe and you get one free allowance, or?
Well, that is exactly why it's very dangerous to be on stage with you at a minimum 6 weeks before we launch the proposal, right? So what I can share is a couple of the principles that I have in mind, some of the parameters the Commission is looking into. I don't think I would help anyone, well, maybe you, but certainly not myself in going any further. And in all honesty, this is also a phase where we are calibrating, where we are listening and having dialogues with industries from all walks of life. where we're looking into the system with member states. And maybe to share one of the other observations that we have, and where I think industry simply is right, and that's another challenge we need to solve, is if you look at the money and where it is going, let me just say we have an opportunity for improvement. Because if you look at the ETS money, you will find that roughly 80% of that money is collected and then immediately goes back to member states. But of that 80%, less than 10% on average is spent on the industries that have generated the money. Now, I'm not in favor of a 100%, filtering back, because you will need to innovate, and you cannot do this at a company by company level. But I do think that industry has a fair point in that if we're in this together, if this is about private and public collaboration, there needs to be more of a quid pro quo. And that is a conversation that we should absolutely have with industry, with member states, and with the European Parliament, of course.
Aside from freelancers, another element many will be keeping a close eye on is the actual cap on emissions, which right now is going down gradually with a so-called linear reduction factor, and is like zeroing out, I think, just before the 2040s. Are you planning to weaken that trajectory, to extend it out into the 2040s?
What I'm going to do, and what the Commission is seeking to do, is basically bridge those various elements that are also hugely important, right? The system needs to work for climate. That's crystal clear. At the same time, it will absolutely need to enhance rather than decrease our competitiveness, because we simply do have a competitiveness problem in Europe. Ideally, it is also going to give a very significant push into our independence and making sure we have industries from all walks of life here in Europe and not moving out. And so that is very important. Other thing that is important to mention is that in terms of the scope and in terms of the things you could include, we have already taken the very deliberate choice to seek to build bridges with our friends from particularly the Global South in our 2040 framework. Because in the end, for the planet, it doesn't matter where emissions are being pumped into the air. Climate change doesn't discriminate. It just does damage to all of us. So it also makes sense to look into where can we most cost effectively get these emissions, as long as we do the job. And that will be also, let's say, the prism through which we will be looking, myself and the colleagues in the Commission, while we're making up this proposal.
Is it fair to translate that to the audience that international carbon credits or offsets, however you want to describe them, will be part of the ETS revision?
I think it is more fundamental. It is taking a view at this system, what has worked well, what could be improved, and how we can move the needle in terms of more action. And be not only technological neutral, but also almost agnostic about this, right? If it works, if it moves the needle in terms of climate action, if it moves the needle in terms of competitiveness and independence, then it is a good thing, right? So that will be the overall approach. And indeed, one of the elements that definitely we will be looking at, I cannot say what way it will be going, but is indeed international credits, but there are more elements to this.
If you'll permit me one more ETS question. The ETS obviously covers more than heavy industry. It covers notably aviation and shipping, but it's not watertight. It doesn't so far cover the full emissions of flights that depart from the EU to destinations outside the EU, for example. Is that something that you're looking at changing?
I've already shared way too much with you. I don't know what the next question is, but I hope it's not on ETS.
I was going to ask, if you were to extend that, are you worried that you might be entering a trade dispute with the United States?
On which one?
Aviation.
Yeah, but I mean, then we first need to come up with a proposal, and then you sure will then judge that, and then, if necessary, ask that question. But I think that's and I hope you forgive me. I have been quite open and frank already about where I seek to take the conversation. But this is also a team sport.
All right.
So we will have a range of conversations and debates within the Commission. And I think there we need to make sure that the ball does the work. And we basically have these conversations before I make all sorts of sweeping statements about what we certainly are going to do, or what we may be going to do. That basically doesn't help the process.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, just on the topic of the US, they seem to have a bit of an issue with some aspects of EU climate policy. I mean, they have
That sounds like an understatement.
Your words, not mine. But yes, I mean, it demanded that the EU withdraw its ETS for shipping. It keeps attacking the EU's methane regulation. So, you know, these attempts to regulate emissions beyond our borders, are they going to, you know, not just like, let's take the ETS aside, but are we creating trade tensions with the US there?
No, I mean, I think we see something that is more fundamental. And I've always been someone who very much looks at European collaboration, but I've also been always very transatlanticist. But it is, and so it is with regret, but it is also, I think, a statement of realism that the broader marriage with our American friends and partners has seen quite a bit of damage in the last year, at least, particularly in the domain of geopolitics, in the domain of trade, in the domain of climate, and also in the domain of that intangible thing called trust. I do think it continues to be of tremendous importance to continue to build bridges with the Americans, look at where our interests are aligned. But it is also true that at the same time, we have to reckon with the fact that they treat dossiers differently than they did before. That is, of course, most pressing and most imminent and most clear in the domain of geopolitics and us being able to defend Europe. But also in the domain of climate. It's very unfortunate, but it's just a reality that the US has decided to check out from the COP, to check out from international climate agreements. And that has huge ramifications for all of us, right? The US is not just the most formidable power the world has, it is also the largest economy, and it is the second largest in terms of its emissions. So, of course, that does damage. But we are where we are. Geopolitics and diplomacy is not about dreaming what the world should be. It is taking it as it is and then seek to advance your interests through partnerships, through collaboration, through negotiations.
But is that pressure from the US affecting the Commission's decision-making on climate policy?
Look, I mean, it's yes and no, right? So where you can see that it clearly affects our ability to operate and the globe's ability to operate is, for example, at the COP. If you look at the COP28 and the agreement on transitioning away from fossil fuels, tripling and doubling, tripling the share of renewables by 2030 and doubling the energy efficiency. That was across the globe seen as a huge success. And indeed, we did play a significant role in organizing that. But let's also salute the tremendous work John Kerry had been doing. And the voice of America, particularly in these type of conversations with others from across the globe, carries a lot of weight. Now they don't participate. And I would tend to think that that actually is detrimental not just for the process, but also for their own interests, because this is not, I mean, climate policy, as we know, is not just about climate. It is also about energy. It is about the economy. NATO argues it is also about geopolitics. So if you vacate your seat at the table, I mean, the others will basically fill up that vacuum. So we are where we are.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of that, I mean, I think in later this month, the EU is hosting the Ministerial on Climate Action that was with Canada and China, right? That was created after the US, in your words, checked out for the first time from the global process. What are your expectations for that? How are you thinking of, you know, I assume it's a bit of a kickstart to, as we move toward the COP, like working with those that fill the vacuum, such as China?
Yeah, maybe just one thing I should have added, because you were asking, is that a problem? And I said yes and no, and I gave you the yes, but maybe not, not the no.
All right.
And again, climate already gives you a fantastic reason to drive down your emissions. Competitiveness dictates that we need to have cheaper energy, and that means energy that is being produced in Europe. But even if those two reasons would not have been enough, just look at what happened to the world and what happened to us with the war in Iran. Prices are up and cost us now, so the daily sum of the damage, and that is just the amount we're paying for oil and gas in addition to what we used to be paying, is $500 million a day. Every single day of this war. And I'm not even talking about the longer term economic ramifications, because this is far from over. And you've all seen the reports of, for example, the IMF, of the global economic damage that this crisis is providing us with. So, if this is the case, and you are a continent like us that imports 80% roughly of its gas, 95% of its oil, you have a climate reason, a competitiveness reason, and certainly also a reason of independence to basically free yourself from the mercy of others and make sure you become energy independent. We have to produce the stuff in Europe. It needs to be dirt cheap, and it will then enhance our autonomy and our independence.
Just to connect back to my question on MOCA, I mean, you've said after last year's COP30 that the EU should approach these talks a bit differently, that maybe learn from that experience that was rather disappointing from the EU. So, what are you going to do differently this year?
So what I've said, and the previous COP was certainly not the drama that maybe some made out of it. We under very difficult circumstances, we indeed did manage to make progress. That is one way of looking at it, and I think it is fair. At the same time, it is also true that if you look at what the problem actually needs and where the bar should then be, and what most of the COPs of the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years have delivered, then you just have to admit that that was underwhelming, right? And then you can try to do the same thing all over again, and you might get lucky again, like in Dubai, or get your strategy right and then build a supermajority that actually then delivers. But apparently we also then, deliver underwhelming results at least a number of times. So in my view, we need to do two things from an international perspective. One is to have the conversation with the COP hosts, but also with our friends at the UN, that we do need to make modifications to the system. And I know that changing the whole setup is, of course, dramatically difficult, right? It's as difficult as changing anything about the UN, and we know how long the conversation about, for example, modifications to the supervisory or the Security Council have already been ongoing. It's close to impossible. And yet, we can change part of it. Just to give you one example, it is weird, right, that the agenda of the COP is not imminently clear to all participants way before we actually arrive there. Just go to the average 3rd division football club here in Brussels. If they have a meeting with their club and the members are invited, they typically tend to know what is on the agenda, what to expect, what to not expect, who's going to talk, etc., etc. I would tend to think we can do the same. The other thing is, let's be realist about multilateralism and unanimity. This system is, in a way, the best we can do, but it is also made for good weather, and that good weather simply doesn't exist anymore. One party, with either interests or whatever the reason may be, is able to spoil it and basically say, "Niet." So rather than putting all our bets, all our cards on the success of a COP, in my view, we need much more plurilateral collaboration. And that is why we have been so active in carbon pricing diplomacy, in building bridges, again, with that group that I just mentioned, Mexico, Brazil, Quebec, California, China, with whom we have a range of difficulties, but we've had very good technical cooperation on carbon pricing. That's just one example. But another example is, for example, the conference that was recently organized by Colombia and the Netherlands on how actually to do this and how to transition away and how to provide an alternative. So these type of initiatives that might not need to take the whole family, but those who are willing and able, is certainly part of the recipe going forward.
I mean, as you say, we don't really know yet the agenda of this COP even, but one theme that seems to be just unifying, discussions everywhere is electrification. Yeah. And that's something that also the hosts of this year's COP have suggested they might make a theme. The International Renewable Energy Agency has even suggested a global target for electrification along the lines of that renewable energy target. Is that something the EU would be on board with?
So just first, let's acknowledge where it is difficult, but also where we have success, right? Because a push for electrification is something that has been very high on Europe's agenda. As a matter of fact, we were the ones pushing for the tripling. And the energy efficiency in the fossil fuels transitioning away, of course, as well, but we were at the heart of that negotiation. So it is fantastic that Chris Bowen wants to shape the COP around this. But it is also fair to say that we have given a lot of push in that direction, not just in the last 6 months, but already over the course of the last couple of years. So that is one. Secondly, I very much agree with this logic. So what the exact parameters of the conversation and the negotiations will be, and what we will then be able to embrace or maybe be more critical of, we need to see, of course, later. But also for Europe, it will be fantastic to have a target for renewables, but also a target for electrification, because that bridges the sometimes almost religious divide between those who are in favor of renewables and those who are in favor of nuclear. And I've always said, and I continue to say, we need both. And of course, both come with conditionalities. Both come with making absolutely sure that the safety is in place. All of what we do, of course, needs to be cost competitive. But we simply don't have the luxury to exclude part of the solution space. We need to do all of it. We need to do solar, we need to do wind, we need to do electrification grids, we need to do interconnectors, storage capacity, heat pumps, geothermal, and nuclear, and that means both prolonging the life of the machines we have and more SMRs. All of that is needed if we are serious about creating that European-made energy abundance.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you a brief question on another topic, which, let's make this a wrap-up question. We're running out of time.
The ETS.
But, well, if you'd like to. But that's on really climate resilience. We've just had in Western Europe like a very unseasonable heat wave again. The WMO is warning that records could be broken as soon as next year again in terms of global temperatures. So what is the Commission doing its part to keep Europeans safe from the impacts of climate change?
Well, I think there are two answers to it. One is, of course, there's a lot of stuff that we have been doing, and on top of that, and on top of what regional governments and national governments are doing, we will come out with our resilience package, including legislation, by the end of this calendar year. And at the same time, if you talk to our citizens who have been at the receiving end of a flood or a heat wave, or whatever the climate disaster has been, and you ask them, well, did we actually do enough? I'm pretty sure that their answer is no, and rightly so. I was recently having a conversation with the Portuguese Parliament, and it was still very much on their mind, the horrors that happened just a few months ago, right? And that is, I think, also the paradox in the reality. On the one hand, we will see ever more of these type of events. And they're just a reflection of how bad the problem has become. And at the same time, sometimes in the political arena, it seems as if there is a desire to pretty much park the problem and ignore it for a while and dream that then maybe it will go away. The reality of today is that the world, and Europe in particular, is facing a range of crises. We have a fundamental geopolitical problem, not just on our own continent, but also a lot of hotspots across the globe. We have a fundamental problem with climate and with energy. We have a fundamental challenge in the domain of AI. On top of that, Europe is struggling with getting its economy in order, and if you ask citizens, they will rightfully point to the migration crisis that is happening all at the same time. And for all of these problems, we simply, as policymakers, we don't have the luxury to pick the problem we like most. We have to address all of them fundamentally at the same time.
And on this reminder on the poly crises, I think we can wrap up, unless you want to tell us more about the ETS. No, thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us here. And to our audience, thank you so much as well. Please just stay for a little bit longer. There'll be one last session. My editor, James, will speak with our American colleague, Deborah Kahn, who's tuning in from across the Atlantic to discuss Trump and Europe's energy imports. Thank you so much.
Thank you.